I don't usually talk about boxing on my channel. I leave that to the experts. But I do like to talk about the heavyweight division, in particular the 20th century when it comes to heavyweight division. That's a part of boxing I'm very interested in, and I've always been interested in. And being a big guy myself, I can relate to the heavyweights. And Blood did an interesting video tonight, and it's something that always drew my interest as well. He talked about how it seems as though the late Muhammad Ali, I still have a hard time calling him, talked about him in the past tense, but how the late Muhammad Ali always seemed to give Rocky Marciano a pass for referring to him by his birth name but not his Islamic name. And he didn't seem to show the same anger toward Marciano calling him that as opposed to other fighters, in particular black fighters. And I know you addressed your video more toward, I guess you said subscribers who are a bit older, being that they were around at that time and they might have a better idea about why that's the case. But I just wanted to give my take on it at least, just because I've always had an interest in that particular era of boxing. I have my theories. I don't know, I don't have any conclusive evidence to back up what I'm saying, but it's just from observation and reading certain things. This is just my guess as to why that's the case. I think number one, although Muhammad Ali was a conscious brother, we all probably still have a tendency to be harder on our own kind than we are toward people who are of different races. Whether that's even with someone like Ali, that's still a form of self-hatred. It's possible. I mean, Ali was conscious, but he did a lot of things that weren't nice. He did refer to Joe Louis and certain African Americans who were darker or who had more Africanized features. He would sometimes call them ugly. You see what I'm saying? Ali did show some signs of self-hatred, whether we want to believe it or not. And this is coming from a guy who, if you know my channel, I'm an extraordinary admirer of Muhammad Ali, okay? So don't come at me saying I'm hating on Ali because you barking up the wrong tree with that one, okay? But he did show some signs of self-hatred at times. That could possibly be one of the reasons why he was harder on a guy like Ernie Terrell and Floyd Patterson as opposed to being harder on Rocky Marciano. Now, another thing that it could be too, another layer of it, is that, I guess it's related to an extent. Muhammad Ali recognized that Rocky Marciano was from a prior generation. Okay, he was born in 1923. He was about 19 years older than Ali. Okay, old enough to be his father, theoretically. Okay, part of World War II generation, served in World War II. There was a large generation gap where Ali probably wasn't even angry at the fact that Marciano called him Clay. That's why he probably had so much respect for Marciano, because he was older. He wasn't really part of that same generation. He gave Marciano respect not only because of who he was, but and the reverence because of who he was, and how great a fighter he was in the 1950s, but also because he was older. So he didn't probably get as offended hearing Marciano call him Clay as he did someone who was a fellow fighter and also part of the same struggle and someone that could relate to Ali, at least in Ali's mind, like an Ernie Terrell or Floyd Patterson, especially Ernie Terrell. And also, you gotta take into account, in my opinion, Ali probably had a bit of an ego. You see what I'm saying? Like, Ali had a bit of an ego. Like, he probably also had it in his mind, I could have let the great Marciano call me Clay. He can get away with calling me Clay. Bernie Terrell? You're not going to disrespect me. Who the fuck are you? You know what I'm saying? In addition to the other things that I had said about him being from the same generation, recognizing where Ali was coming from with the name change, but still choosing to call him that to spite him. You know, and also, I would say from the time that Ali changed his name, 1964, to about 1970 or so, Ali was more radicalized. He had just been indoctrinized into the Nation of Islam. Really, and a lot of times when you just convert to something, you're really strong in it. You're really reactionary to anything that opposes it. You're very strong-willed, and every little slight or subtle slight will piss you off. So when people called him Cassius Clay, especially those who were African American and part of his generation and younger, it antagonized him. He read how, I remember hearing him say in interviews how often when he read news organizations keep calling him Cassius Clay, pissed him off so badly, and maybe it did to an extent piss him off when he might read Marciano refer to him as Clay, but out of respect, he let him just get away with it. But I think what probably led to Ali, and this is just a guess on my part, what probably led to Ali slowly losing the anger from being called Clay is when Howard Cosell, who was a very respected newsman, referred to him as Muhammad Ali, right? Then you had other legitimate news sources slowly stop calling him Clay and refer to him as Muhammad Ali. That's when he felt he got the respect and the recognition from what might have been, for once, what may have been only 5% of news magazines to maybe 20%, to 50%, to 70%, to virtually everybody called him that. With only very few exceptions. Maybe his parents and Marciano, you know what I mean? I think that's what it was. And then I remember also hearing him say in interviews that by the time the 1970s rolled around, when people called him Clay, it no longer made him mad. It no longer had the same effect as it did when he was trying to garner respect for what he believed in and why he had the name change and why he, didn't want to be called it anymore. I think perhaps he saw, I don't know, I'm trying to think of other people I can compare him to. I know with Malcolm X, maybe he just thought to himself, perhaps earlier he was trying to compare himself to Malcolm X and patterned himself after Malcolm X. Now, Malcolm X never acknowledged the little surname anymore. And maybe he just sort of said, some people may just keep calling me Clay for whatever reason. Maybe they don't necessarily have animus in their heart, so I'll let certain things slide. Like, for instance, I think you referenced this in your video, Blood. You said that Floyd Patterson still called Ali Clay at times. I think you said something about he was the only person that he let him get away with calling him Clay. Little things like that. Now, as far as the relationship between he and Rocky Marciano, from what I can see, they didn't really have much of a personal relationship until the super fight. And the super fight was in July 1969. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, it was a computerized thing, some thing where they try to put in all of the great heavyweight champions of the 20th century, late 19th and the late 19th and into the 20th century, from John L. Sullivan all the way to Muhammad Ali at the time, and they put them in a computer, and they had like this, it was sort of like this what do you call it, like a tournament of all-time great fighters, and I think it came down to Rocky Marciano and Cassius Clay, the two undefeated fighters at the particular time. And they had this simulated super fight, which was filmed in the summer of 1969. And Rocky Marciano, hadn't fought in 12 or 13 years, 13 years at the time. Ali hadn't really fought in, I think, in 2 years, And both men were out of shape, although Marciano was more so out of shape and older. Marciano at the time was 45 years old, partially bald and very overweight, but he lost a lot of weight because he wanted to look decent on film and be able to move around like he did, similar to how he did when he was a fighter. Active fighter, he wore a toupee, and they went through the motions with this fake fight. But apparently during this fight, they bonded. They got closer. They talked. And I think Marciano came away knowing Clay a little bit more so than what he had before, because he was very critical of Clay. I'm calling him Clay now. I'm calling him Clay only because I'm referring to Marciano. He only had heard of Clay, reading about what he said during the press and the media, whatever. But both men came away with much more respect toward the other man as a person, as well as their fighting ability. I remember hearing that Marciano said that he had never seen a man with as fast as hand speed as Ali. And Ali said he had never fought anybody who had hit as hard as Marciano. And it was only roughly a month after this fight, or 5 or 6 weeks after this fight had finished filming, that Rocky Marciano died in a plane crash the day before his 46th birthday. And that ended what could have been a burgeoning friendship between the two. So I can't say that both these men were great friends, but they had come to, admire each other in many ways. I did remember hearing in an interview before he died that Ali's trainer had stated that Marciano did not like him, but I sometimes think that was prior to the super fight, and I like to think that they had garnered respect for one another. And Angelo Dundee, his name slipped my mind for a second, but Angelo Dundee, I like to think that this was before that super bout, where they had got to know each other for a little bit, and they garnered some more respect for one another. But I think primarily, in conclusion, I think that Ali just gave Marciano a pass for that because of who he was, the generation that he came from. Like, this is a guy who referenced Joe Louis, wasn't entirely cognizant of why Ali and many other African Americans felt the way that they did about the government and the country in the 1960s. He probably didn't quite get it. You know what I'm saying? He was Italian American. In his generation, he thought America was the land of opportunity. So he didn't quite understand, I guess in his mind, why people are complaining about a country that can give you so much, but he doesn't quite, it's just different cultures, different races, religions, different things, but in a nutshell, that's why I think that Muhammad Ali gave Rocky Marciano a pass for calling him Cassius Clay.